Hey there, Drowsy Historian here. Tonight you'll be attending a seance in Victorian London, a city where grief has become fashionable and belief comes trimmed with lace. Before we dim the lamps and draw the curtains, do me one small favour. Tell me where you're listening from and what time it is there. If you'd prefer these stories without ads, you can join the Patreon. It's linked in the description. And if you want the ultimate immersive experience, consider using a pair of wireless earbuds. They're comfortable, discreet, and designed so you can wear them even while sleeping. I've linked my favourite pair plus other sleep tools in the description. Now, lie back, get comfortable. Let's begin. The envelope arrives in the late afternoon, delivered by hand and sealed in black wax as though it carries the fate of an empire. The paper is thick, the handwriting elegant, the faint perfume clinging to it too dignified to name. Inside lies a small gilt-edged card embossed so deeply it casts its own shadow. You are cordially invited to an evening of spiritual inquiry this very night at 8 o'clock. There is no mention of ghosts or seances or the dearly departed, only that phrase, spiritual inquiry, chosen carefully to make the supernatural sound respectable. In London, even death must be invited with decorum. You turn the card in your hand, admiring the extravagance of its lettering. The Victorians cannot resist a flourish, even when summoning eternity. The ink gleams slightly, as if still damp from the pen. Whoever wrote this intended not just to intrigue you, but to remind you of your place, one of the select company. Declining would be social heresy. Belief, after all, has become an accessory of the educated. To doubt too loudly is to risk sounding provincial. Better to attend, observe politely, and make one's conclusions later over sherry. Still, the card carries an odd gravity. There was a time when such inquiries would have been left to the clergy, but science has made the clergy unfashionable, and fashion has filled the void. Now the afterlife can be discussed as easily as evolution, so long as one has the right glassware and sufficient seating. The upper classes no longer pray, they experiment and call it enlightenment. The modern age has electrified everything except the human soul, which refuses to behave according to natural law. The sender's name is familiar, a respectable Bloomsbury household touched recently by tragedy. Their eldest son died abroad, of fever or misadventure. The details vary depending on who's gossiping. Such losses are strangely advantageous. They make a family both pitiable and fascinating. And so this evening of spiritual inquiry serves a dual purpose, to heal and to remind society that the bereaved remain relevant. Nothing redeems scandal quite like fashionable grief. You prop the card on your mantle, meaning to ignore it, but it sits there like a challenge. The light from the window fades and the gold trim glints faintly in the dusk. You tell yourself you're not superstitious, just curious. Everyone is these days. London has been swept by seances the way it was once swept by cholera. Each neighbourhood has its chosen medium, each drawing room its preferred ghost. Some claim to speak with angels, others with housemaids. You can't decide which is more impressive. Dinner passes in a distracted conversation. You half listen to the clock strike 7 and realise, with mild resignation, that you're already preparing to go. Curiosity in this century is indistinguishable from obligation. There's also the unspoken promise of diversion, the kind that passes for intellectual adventure among people who have nothing left to fear but boredom. You glance once more at the invitation and think, if nothing else, it will be amusing to see whether the dead are better conversationalists than the living. You find yourself studying the back of the card, where a small motif has been embossed. 2 doves facing one another, their wings almost touching. Beneath them the words, attendance limited to select company. The phrasing is deliciously smug. The afterlife, apparently, is as exclusive as the season's best soirees. You imagine the guest list, widows in black lace, gentlemen of learning, a medium trembling on cue, a performance of sincerity performed for people who cannot stand silence. The lamps hiss as you step into the hallway. Outside the window, the fog has begun to gather, soft and low against the street. London always smells faintly of damp wool and ambition at this hour. You pause to fasten your coat and catch your reflection in the glass, perfectly respectable, faintly uncertain. You wonder briefly what sort of person spends their evening attempting to contact the dead, and then remember that person is you. There's comfort in knowing the evening will proceed according to form. Polite introductions, a few tasteful tears, perhaps a table that shakes obligingly under collective tension. You will observe it all with the calm of a modern mind, taking notes in silence, pretending not to hope for something real. Because that's the secret of these gatherings. Everyone comes to disbelieve, and everyone leaves half afraid they were wrong. You slip the card into your pocket. Its gilt edge catches the light before vanishing into shadow. Outside, the city hums, carriages passing, gas lamps flickering, footsteps swallowed by the mist. Somewhere beyond that grey veil lies the address printed on your invitation, waiting like a stage already set. You take your hat and gloves, lock the door behind you, and step into the fog. The air is cool and faintly metallic, the kind that tastes of rain and coal. You draw your collar close, the card pressing against your palm like a quiet promise, and begin to walk toward the house, where the living plan to summon the dead. The walk to Bloomsbury is a quiet one. The fog thickens as you go, gathering around your boots and softening the rattle of carriage wheels. The gas lamps burn low behind glass, their halos diffused into trembling gold orbs that seem to hover without direction. You pass the occasional pedestrian, each a blurred shape, moving with the slow caution of someone unsure what's real in the mist. And for a moment, the whole of London feels less like a city than a seance in progress. Even the night air seems to hold its breath, waiting for something to reveal itself. You find the address easily enough. A row of respectable townhouses standing shoulder to shoulder, their facades identical except for the subtle signs of wealth that mark one from the next. The one you seek is unmistakable. Its shutters are drawn despite the lingering twilight, and black drapery hangs over the doorway like a sigh that has forgotten how to end. Two narrow lamps flank the steps, burning steadily in the gloom. Their light glints faintly off brass railings, polished to excess as though no trace of the outside world should be allowed to cling to them. A servant opens the door before you can knock. He is middle-aged and discreetly spectral himself, thin, pale and moving, with the soundless efficiency of long service. Without expression, he takes your hat and coat, his gaze never quite meeting yours. The entry hall behind him is narrow and immaculate, lined with framed prints, and a single gilt mirror that throws back the flicker of candles like nervous applause. Somewhere deeper in the house a clock chimes the quarter hour, its tone precise enough to feel judgmental. The scent hits you first, lilies, sharp and sweet, mingled with the heavier undertone of beeswax and stale incense. It is the smell of morning, too deliberate to be comforting. The hall is dim despite its many candles, the wallpaper patterned in dark green damask that seems to absorb more light than it reflects. You catch a glimpse of your own reflection, again in the mirror, paler than you remember. And then the servant gestures silently toward a pair of open doors at the end of the corridor. The drawing room lies beyond, warm with candlelight, yet somehow cold at its centre. It has the unmistakable atmosphere of a place too carefully arranged for comfort. Heavy drapes, silver candelabra, a piano whose lid remains firmly shut. Every surface shines. Portraits of the family line the walls, their faces rendered in that faintly idealized style that always makes the living look suspiciously well behaved. Most are framed in black ribbon. On a small table beneath one of them sits a vase filled with fresh lilies, their whiteness almost defiant against the room's gloom. The hostess rises as you enter. She wears mourning with effortless elegance, black silk, jet beads, a lace collar so fine it could be mistaken for frost. Her expression is calm, the composure of a woman who has wept on schedule and now manages her grief like an inherited estate. She greets you with practiced warmth, the kind that has learned how to be grateful without appearing hopeful. Her hand is cool, her voice low but precise, and when she speaks of her late son, never by name, only by our loss. The words fall with the polished rhythm of a speech repeated often enough to become memory's echo. You murmur your sympathies and she receives them as though collecting fine china, with thanks but no intention of using them. For a moment, her eyes flick toward the mantel, where a small photograph sits in a silver frame. The young man within it appears more decoration than memory, smiling faintly, immortalized in the act of looking earnest. You suspect he was loved intensely, though perhaps not well. A small fire burns in the grate, giving off more glow than heat. It makes the shadows shift lazily across the carpet, as if alive. Beside it, a sideboard gleams with crystal glasses and a decanter of port left open to breathe. You're offered a glass which you accept, more out of duty than thirst, and find the taste cloying, syrupy, faintly medicinal. Conversation feels impossible in this air, as though every word must squeeze through candle smoke and expectation before reaching the ear. The hostess excuses herself with the promise of introducing you to the others presently, leaving you for a moment among the furniture. The silence is nearly perfect, save for the faint creak of the house itself, wood settling, air moving where it shouldn't. The sound of carriage wheels drifts faintly from the street, the rhythm soft and ghostly, like someone drumming from another world. You look toward the curtained windows, but can see nothing beyond them. It occurs to you that this room has been arranged to forget the existence of the outside entirely. The longer you stand, the more the decor begins to feel oppressive. The colours, crimson, gold, black, press inward, as if the walls themselves are rehearsing their lines for the evening's performance. You notice the details that once seemed ornamental now appear vaguely funereal. The carved angels on the clock, the tassels hanging limp from the drapes, the black ribbon wound neatly around each picture frame. The air seems thicker near the floor, the kind that would extinguish a candle if one stooped too low. You take another sip of port and feel it linger unpleasantly, sweet and heavy as perfume. Your attention drifts toward the doorway where you entered. The servant stands there still, perfectly still, as if he's been waiting for centuries for a cue that never comes. His gaze hovers somewhere above your shoulder, politely pretending not to see you seeing him. When he finally steps aside, it's without sound. Behind him, the corridor stretches dimly back to the entrance, the row of candles burning lower now, their light reduced to trembling points. Somewhere deeper in the house, a door opens, followed by the murmur of new voices arriving. The hostess reappears at the threshold, composed once more, her smile poised between gratitude and exhaustion. "Our company gathers," she says softly, as if afraid the house itself might overhear her. She glances toward the clock, then toward you, and for a brief instant you sense genuine relief, something like a woman clinging to manners, as one might to a railing in rough water. The expression vanishes quickly, replaced by duty. She gestures toward a pair of tall doors across the room, their panels carved with vines and cherubs, the handles shaped like wings. "We shall move to the parlour shortly," she murmurs, "when all are present." Her tone is final yet uncertain, like a prayer that's been practiced but never believed. The drawing room fills slowly, as though the guests are materialising rather than arriving. You hear them before you see them. The soft thud of carriage doors closing outside, the shuffle of feet in the hallway, the murmured adjustments of tone as everyone tries to sound both curious and composed. The servant moves among them like a shadow, collecting cloaks and gloves with silent precision. One by one the figures drift in, each one carrying a faint aura of self-conscious solemnity, as though entering a chapel where the sermon will be about themselves. You take your seat along the edge of the parlour, where the gaslight glows through layers of lace curtains, filtering the room into a haze of amber and grey. There is a certain choreography to these gatherings, and everyone seems to know their role instinctively. The first to arrive is a widow in her 40s, wrapped in mourning so complete it might be mistaken for devotion. Her gown gleams faintly with jet beads that catch the candlelight like tiny black mirrors, and her veil, though thin, seems designed to conceal not her face, but her hesitation. She sits near the centre of the room, clutching a small locket at her throat, one that she opens and closes in slow intervals, as if measuring time by grief. She doesn't speak, but her presence demands interpretation, and several guests oblige with sympathetic glances that border on envy. After her comes a doctor, clean-shaven, precise, and visibly sceptical in that particular way reserved for men of science who attend spiritual functions for the sake of social anthropology. He carries his spectacles in his hand, turning them over idly, as if each fingerprint left on the glass were an opportunity to think. His gaze wanders to the table at the centre of the room, where the candles burn steadily, and you can almost hear his internal catalogue forming. Air currents, suggestibility, sleight of hand. Yet when he finally sits, his posture is rigid, and his eyes flick occasionally toward the darkened corners, betraying that even disbelief has its superstitions. The next arrival is a clergyman, also you assume from the faint gleam of a clerical collar beneath his coat. He looks as though he would rather be anywhere else, perhaps tending to the moral hygiene of the parish rather than the psychic hygiene of the privileged. He greets the hostess with grave courtesy, and then sits as far from the candles as propriety allows. His hands fold and unfold on his lap, his gaze fixed on the carpet. Every so often, he sighs quietly. Not quite pious disapproval, not quite fatigue, but the exhalation of a man trying to forgive his own attendants. The last to enter before the doors close is an aristocrat of the sort one recognises immediately. Tall, elegantly indifferent, his evening coat cut to perfection, and his expression designed to suggest that ennui is the highest form of intellect. He surveys the room as if the afterlife were an inconvenience he's been obliged to attend. When he catches sight of the mourning widow, he offers her a slight, almost charitable bow, the kind given by men who mistake sympathy for courtship. He then seats himself near the fire, stretching one hand toward the heat with deliberate languor, and remarks to no one in particular that seances have become rather overdone this season. His voice carries just enough to make certain it is heard. The hostess moves through this small constellation of personalities with practiced grace, her every gesture a performance of restraint. She inquires after health, after travel, after mutual acquaintances, as if these pleasantries could disguise the fact that everyone is here to witness something fundamentally improper. You can feel her grief hovering beneath her civility, though it has been carefully polished into something almost decorative, like the silver candlesticks gleaming on the sideboard. She offers each guest a polite nod, then takes her seat beside the table, her eyes flickering briefly toward the empty chair reserved at its head. The conversation that follows is a curious balancing act, a polite struggle between disbelief and the desire to appear receptive. The widow speaks softly of dreams that feel like visitations, while the clergyman counters with an anecdote about faith being tested in unexpected ways. The doctor hums faintly through his nose, as though cataloguing these remarks for a future paper on mass hysteria. The aristocrat remarks that he once attended a seance in Paris where the spirit refused to speak unless addressed in French. Everyone laughs, quietly, correctly, and the momentary warmth of shared absurdity hangs in the air like a fragile truce. You observe how every gesture carries significance now. Every cough feels deliberate, every rustle of fabric timed with unconscious precision. The candles sputter faintly in their holders, and half the guests glance upward, as if this too might be a sign. There is a strange democracy in the room. For all their differences in class and creed, each person is united by the fear of being the least spiritual participant present. In Victorian London, one must believe just enough to seem interesting, but not enough to seem unwell. The hostess clears her throat softly, the only sound she has made in several minutes, and the room's chatter fades on cue. She announces that all who were expected have arrived. Her tone carries a subtle relief, as though each new guest had delayed not just the evening, but her courage. The servant moves around the perimeter, extinguishing a few lamps until the light settles into a soft amber dusk. Shadows gather politely at the edges of the furniture, waiting their turn to participate. There is a short pause, that particular silence born of anticipation and etiquette combined. The widow folds her hands. The doctor leans back, ready to observe rather than join. The clergyman's lips move faintly, perhaps in prayer, perhaps in internal negotiation. The aristocrat glances toward the table again, where a single bell has been placed beside the candles, its handle shaped like a cherub's head. The room holds itself very still, as though fearing that motion might break the illusion before it begins. The hostess looks around, her gaze settling briefly on each guest. Her voice is almost a whisper when she speaks again. "You are all most kind to come," she says. "It has been a comfort knowing others are willing to inquire where reason hesitates." The sentence hangs delicately, the sort of line that could pass for philosophy or for grief. She smooths a fold of her skirt and glances toward the empty chair at the head of the table. A faint shuffling is heard in the hallway, the sound of someone being positioned or prepared. The servant reappears briefly, bowing to the hostess with a look of subtle caution. The kind of look that passes between people about to do something everyone will later deny was foolish. The hostess nods once in return, her composure unbroken. The murmurs in the room fade one by one, until the only sound is the low crackle of the fire. She rises slowly, resting one hand on the back of her chair, and allows herself a small fixed smile. "If you will all be so good as to take your places," she says. "Our medium will now take her seat." The words are spoken evenly, yet something shifts in the air the moment they leave her mouth. The laughter dies entirely. The aristocrat lowers his hand from the fire. The doctor adjusts his spectacles. The widow presses the locket to her chest. Even the clergyman looks up, caught between skepticism and superstition. The servant opens the parlour doors once more, letting in a narrow corridor of light. The door opens just wide enough for her to slip through. She moves with the hesitance of someone walking into their own dream, or someone very good at pretending to. The medium is younger than you expected, perhaps no more than 25, pale enough to seem carved from wax, and thin in that particular way that Victorians have come to associate with moral purity. Her hair, if it is truly hers, is pinned beneath a dark lace veil that falls almost to her shoulders, and around her neck hangs a small amulet, a dull bronze disc etched with a pattern that looks suspiciously like mass-produced mysticism. The candlelight trembles faintly as she passes, and several guests interpret this as confirmation of her power. You suspect it's just the draught. She pauses just inside the door, lowering her head as though to greet both the living and whatever else might be listening. The servant closes the doors softly behind her, sealing the room with the finality of a coffin lid. The air, already heavy, seems to grow thicker. The medium lifts her eyes, pale grey, almost colourless, and surveys the gathering with an expression that hovers somewhere between compassion and hunger. She has the calm assurance of someone who has learned that silence is the most convincing sound. The hostess rises to introduce her, though no one truly requires the introduction. Miss Howard has been of great comfort to many, she says, her voice delicate, practiced, and barely steady. She joins us tonight in the hope that she may provide guidance. The word lingers like perfume, vague enough to mean anything. The guests murmur polite approval, each pretending not to notice how eagerly the others do so. The doctor inclines his head with clinical courtesy. The clergyman mutters something about discernment, and the widow closes her eyes briefly as though already halfway across the veil. The medium offers a faint nod before taking her seat at the head of the table. She moves as if conscious of being observed from several directions at once, by her audience, by her own nerves, and by something unseen that she must remember to perform for. Her hands, gloved in thin black silk, rest lightly on the table's edge, fingers splayed in delicate alignment. You notice how every movement is deliberate, the precise lowering of her shoulders, the slow exhale timed perfectly to draw attention without appearing theatrical. It is a masterclass in restraint, or at least in the illusion of it. The hostess, visibly relieved that the evening has reached its proper beginning, signals to the servant to dim the lights. One by one, the lamps along the walls are turned down, their glow softening until the room resembles the inside of an amber shell. The last lamp flickers once before being extinguished, leaving only the candles clustered on the table, their flames mirrored faintly in the polish of the mahogany. Shadows gather in the corners, thick as folded cloth. The effect is immediately impressive, and everyone seems too aware of it. The medium begins to speak, her voice low and melodic, with the cadence of a prayer half remembered from childhood. She thanks the attentive spirits who gather where hearts are open, which is to say, anywhere with paying customers. She speaks of energy, of love, of the thin veil between worlds, and though her words are nonsense, they are beautifully constructed nonsense. The doctor's pen trembles faintly as he fights the urge to take notes. The clergyman stares at his folded hands, visibly calculating how many sins this might count as. The widow listens with rapt attention, tears beginning their slow and inevitable migration toward her veil. The air in the room grows warmer, whether from candlelight or nerves, you cannot tell, but a faint sheen of perspiration begins to appear along the temple of nearly every participant. The wax thickens on the candles, forming pale rivers down their sides. You're suddenly aware of how close everyone is seated. 12 bodies arranged around a table meant for 8, knees nearly touching under the linen cloth. The faint mingling of perfumes, starch and apprehension creates a scent not unlike a florist's shop after a funeral. The medium opens her eyes fully now, gaze distant yet focused. "To begin," she whispers, "we must join hands, that the circle may be unbroken." Her tone implies that not joining hands would risk cosmic catastrophe. The guests obey instantly. You feel a hesitant touch on your left, the widow's hand cool and damp, and a firmer grasp on your right belonging to the doctor, who manages to appear both sceptical and deeply uncomfortable. Across the table, the aristocrat suppresses a sigh as his manicured fingers disappear into those of the clergyman. It may be the first and last act of equality any of them perform. The moment stretches. The room, once filled with small noises, fabric shifting, chairs creaking, The gentle murmur of etiquette now settles into an uneasy stillness. The medium lowers her head again, whispering words that no one can quite hear, but everyone feels obliged to respect. The sound of her breath mingles with the faint rasp of candle flames. It is a curiously intimate atmosphere, the kind of closeness that would be scandalous in daylight, but feels entirely respectable when attributed to the dead. You notice the absurdity of it all, though carefully, so as not to smirk. Here sit London's finest, arranged like penitents, around a table, eyes half closed, hands interlocked, as if awaiting divine instruction, and all of it beside a teapot still warm from supper. There's something almost touching about it, this willingness to discard decorum at the promise of mystery. The Victorians will not speak plainly of their desires, but they will gladly invite them to supper under the guise of science. The medium's breathing deepens. She begins a low hum, neither tune nor prayer, but something between the two, a sound that seems to come less from her throat than from the air around her. The hostess watches intently, her expression a mix of reverence and fear, as though she has just remembered what she hopes to accomplish. The candlelight flickers again, and one of the flames gutters, prompting a collective intake of breath. For a brief instant, you feel the power of suggestion reach out like a cold hand. Even disbelief has its moments of faith. The doctor shifts in his chair, then quickly stills himself, unwilling to be the first to break the illusion. The clergyman clears his throat softly, which earns him several reproachful glances. The widow presses her hands tighter, lips moving in silent supplication. A bead of wax slides down the side of a candle, pooling near the base like a slow white tear. The air has grown so dense, it seems to hum against the skin. You can hear the faint creak of the table beneath the collective weight of expectation. The medium lifts her chin slightly, her voice no longer whispering but resonant, shaped for the acoustics of parlours like this. "We must now invite the presents," she says. "Think of those you have loved. Think of what remains unsaid. Let the silence be your signal." Her tone carries the authority of someone who's given these instructions many times before. She closes her eyes again, and the room obeys her unspoken command. The silence deepens, punctuated only by the soft rhythm of breathing and the occasional shift of fabric. You feel the hand on your right tremble slightly. Perhaps the doctor is less immune to atmosphere than he imagined. The warmth of the room mingles with the waxy scent of extinguished wicks. Though no one dares reach for air, the medium's hum fades to nothing. For a long moment, there is only stillness. You imagine the house itself listening. The timbers, the portraits, the spaces between walls, all holding their breath with the same reverent foolishness as the people within it. Somewhere in the darkness, a chair creaks faintly, the sound amplified by tension into something almost meaningful. No one speaks. A candle sputters, then steadies. You realise that this is the true beginning of every seance. Not the knocking or the voices, but this, the moment where nothing happens and everyone pretends that something might. The medium lowers her head once more. Her voice is a whisper again, softer now, almost tender. "We are joined," she murmurs. "We are seen." The words fall into the heavy air, like stones into water. You feel the widow's hand tighten around yours. The doctor exhales through his nose. The hostess sits utterly still, her gaze fixed on the centre of the table, where the candlelight has dimmed into a subdued shimmer. The last lamp by the fireplace is extinguished. The room surrenders to its own darkness. The perfume of lilies, the warmth of wax, the mingled scent of fear and hope all merge into something nearly tangible. You can hear the faint, rhythmic creak of wood beneath shifting weight, the breath of a dozen people, too polite to panic. Then, from somewhere near the head of the table, a voice, barely more than a whisper, emerges. We are ready. The words hang there, fragile, and the silence that follows feels deeper than before, as if the air itself is listening. The medium's head remains bowed, her lips moving in slow, deliberate murmurs that seem to ripple through the heavy air. You can't tell if she's praying, reciting, or merely keeping time with her nerves. The sound is low and rhythmical, a language built from breath rather than meaning. Around her, the candle flames bend and recover in a gentle pulse, each flicker greeted by the room's collective tightening. The seance has begun, though no one yet dares to name it aloud. At first, there's nothing but that voice. It winds through the air like smoke, occasionally pausing, as if listening for an answer. The rest of the room seems to follow her lead. Even the fire in the grate softens its crackle, as though refusing to interrupt. Somewhere behind you, someone's chair creaks, and half the circle flinches. It's the first sign of how fragile this calm truly is. A silence so rehearsed, it can be shattered by the honest noise of living bodies. The medium's voice grows firmer, more deliberate. "Spirits who walk between the worlds," she murmurs, "hear us who seek in good faith." The phrase is just ambiguous enough to satisfy everyone. The widow's lips move in silent accompaniment, the clergyman's in disapproval. The doctor's posture remains impeccable, but his thumb taps once against the tabletop, betraying an unconscious restlessness. It is the sound of skepticism keeping time. The medium pauses, and in that breathless space, every sound seems to bloom, unnaturally loud. The faint hiss of the gas lamp in the corridor, the soft rustle of a dress hem, even your own heartbeat drumming like an impatient spectator. It's strange how quickly the senses betray reason in this kind of darkness. You begin to notice the smallest things, the warm slick of perspiration where palms meet, the smell of extinguished wax drifting over the lilies, the sound of someone swallowing hard nearby. She exhales slowly and resumes, her tone now more commanding. We ask humbly for the presence of those who have crossed before us. If there is peace, show it. If there is unrest, speak it. The wording is impeccable, an invitation vague enough to include every hope and exclude no possibility. In another context, it might pass for poetry, though here it feels more like bait cast into the dark. The room holds its collective breath, the way one waits for thunder after lightning. The first sound is faint, a sigh maybe, or a small exhalation of air against wood. It might easily have been the house itself settling, but no one wishes to be the first to name it mundane. The widow gasps softly, her hand twitching in yours. Across the table the clergyman shifts in his seat, and the doctor's tapping thumb freezes mid-beat. The medium does not move. "Be welcome," she whispers into the dark. "Be kind." You find yourself wondering absurdly how many seances begin with precisely that phrase. There must be a manual somewhere, etiquette for inviting the departed, filed neatly beside the books on proper morning attire. It's a comforting thought, in its way, that even the supernatural requires good manners. The Victorians will not abide chaos, not even from the afterlife. The air grows warmer again, thick with the shared breath of a dozen anxious people pretending to be serene. The candles shudder as if caught in an invisible draught, and one guttering flame briefly dies, sending up a thread of smoke that twists toward the ceiling. The medium does not acknowledge it. She's somewhere else now, her head tilted back slightly, eyes still closed. Her lips move, but her words have slipped into something less human, a blend of whisper and groan that no longer seeks to persuade, only to unsettle. The hostess sitting nearest the head of the table leans forward. "Is someone here?" she asks, her voice cracking at the edges of formality. The question hovers between command and confession. The medium stills. For a long moment, the silence is absolute. Then from somewhere deep within the wood of the table, a knock sounds, sharp, distinct, and immediate. It echoes once, then twice before fading into the stillness. The reaction is instantaneous. The widow stiffens, eyes glistening behind her veil. The clergyman clutches his knee beneath the table. The aristocrat's languid posture straightens by an imperceptible inch. The doctor exhales through his nose, perhaps in relief, perhaps in verification. You too feel something tighten along your spine. Not belief exactly, but the thrill of witnessing everyone else believe. The medium lowers her head again. 1 for yes, she whispers. 2 for no. Her tone carries the soft inevitability of a nursery rhyme, and everyone nods as though they've known this rule all along. The hostess draws a shaky breath. Are we in the presence of one who means us no harm? She asks, the question balanced precariously between courage and absurdity. A single knock follows, crisp as applause. The widow sobs once quietly. You try to reason it out. The acoustics, the possibility of wood expanding under heat, the servant hidden somewhere with an elaborate sense of timing. But reason sounds embarrassingly small when spoken to oneself in candlelight. The table, perfectly ordinary a few moments ago, now feels animate, less a piece of furniture than a living witness. Its surface gleams under the waxy glow, and you can almost imagine a pulse beneath the polish. The medium's breathing deepens, ragged but deliberate, as if her own body is being used as a kind of instrument. She speaks again, voice lower now, almost masculine in tone. Who calls to us, she asks. Who seeks to be known? The question trembles through the room, brushing against everyone's private fears. No answer comes, and somehow the absence feels louder than any reply could. The hostess tries again. If you are here, she says, give us a sign. For a moment nothing happens. Then so faintly you could mistake it for imagination, a chair leg shifts, just enough to creak. Every head turns toward the sound. The clergyman's lips move in silent protest. The doctor mutters something that might be nonsense, and the aristocrat raises an eyebrow with weary amusement. But no one laughs. The room's dignity is too tightly strung for that. The medium's posture changes, not dramatically, but noticeably. Her shoulders square, her hands press harder into the tabletop. They are near, she breathes. They are listening. The words should sound comforting, but they don't. Instead, they fall into the hush like droplets into oil, spreading unease rather than reassurance. You notice your own reflection, faintly mirrored in the polished wood. A face dimly lit, eyes wide, mouth set in something between a smirk and a prayer. The tension thickens until it feels almost physical. Every breath seems to draw the air out of the room rather than into it. Someone shifts, and the sudden noise of fabric scraping against wood makes half the circle flinch. The candles seem smaller now, their glow reduced to a nervous trembling. The widow whispers her husband's name, and the sound lands in the air like a confession. The medium raises one hand, her fingers trembling but controlled. Do not fear, she says softly. They mean us no harm. The reassurance would feel more convincing if her own expression didn't suggest otherwise. Her lips quiver, her brow furrows, and for a moment it's unclear whether she's communing with spirits or simply fighting to maintain the performance. Still, everyone watches her as though the world might tilt on her next breath. You feel the circle's grip tighten, not symbolic unity, but the instinctive response of people who sense they've stepped too close to something they don't understand. The air seems to hum faintly, a vibration at the edge of hearing that could be nerves or something else entirely. You find yourself wondering whether the seance has summoned the dead or merely exposed how alive everyone still is. Anxious, yearning, pretending composure. The medium's breathing quickens. She tilts her head slightly, as if listening to a sound no one else can hear. Her lips part. They come, she whispers, the words almost lost to the soft crackle of the fire. Then, from somewhere near the base of the table, a faint rattle sounds. followed by what might be a sigh, or the echo of one. The guests freeze. The room's breath stops entirely. And then, in a voice that isn't quite the medium's, too low, too far back in the throat to belong to her, something speaks. The words are indistinct, blurred by the air itself, but the effect is unmistakable. Every person in the room stiffens, hands clenching, faces drained of expression. Even the doctor's eyes go wide behind his spectacles. Whatever the sound was, trick, wind or voice, it halts everything. The medium's mouth remains open, but no sound follows. The room holds its breath again, as if waiting for the impossible to finish what it started. The silence that follows is thick and complete, the sort that presses against the skin. Then, somewhere in the gloom, a candle sputters. The flame bends sharply, guttering sideways as though breathed upon, and a shiver passes through the room, like a ripple through water. No one speaks, but every face seems to tighten, waiting for proof of what they already fear they've heard. The medium lowers her head once more, her breathing audible now, deliberate but uneven. "Be calm," she whispers, though the tremor in her voice betrays her. They draw near. The hostess murmurs a quick, uncertain prayer, while the widow clutches her locket so tightly it clicks against her ring. The aristocrat shifts slightly in his chair, his expression polite but uneasy. A man who has realised that his evening's entertainment may be less metaphorical than advertised. Across from him, the clergyman clears his throat, a sound instantly devoured by the air. The temperature drops perceptibly, or perhaps the idea of it does. You feel the chill move up your arms, a subtle current that seems to come from nowhere in particular. Someone near the window gasps softly, and every head turns in unison. The curtains, heavy with dust and brocade, sway by no more than an inch, a motion so small it might be imagined, but no one wishes to test it. The candles flicker again, and one goes out completely, leaving a thin strand of smoke that curls like handwriting toward the ceiling. The medium's eyes flutter open, wide and glassy. "They are with us," she says, though her voice no longer seems entirely her own. "They wish to be known." The phrase lands with careful ambiguity, half revelation, half recitation. It's difficult to tell whether she's channeling or simply remembering her lines. Either way, the effect is convincing. The widow stifles a sob, and the clergyman lowers his head, his folded hands trembling faintly in the candlelight. The doctor's jaw tightens, as though he's calculating the cost of appearing unmoved. A faint tapping begins at the far end of the table, irregular at first, then steady, like a nervous heartbeat translated into wood. Each knock sends a pulse through the circle, an involuntary tightening of fingers and breath. The medium murmurs encouragements. "Yes, yes, we hear you. We are listening." The sound shifts, moving from one end of the table to the other, as though something invisible is pacing its surface. The hostess, ever the guardian of civility, whispers steady under her breath, as if she were managing an unruly orchestra. The tapping stops. For a brief instant, relief flickers through the group like a draught of air. Then something else stirs, a faint metallic jingle from somewhere near the floor. You look down. The tambourine, which had been resting on a nearby chair for reasons no one ever fully explained, now lies on its side, trembling faintly before rolling halfway across the carpet. The sound it makes, a hollow, delicate rattle, is disproportionately loud. The widow cries out and immediately apologizes for it, the apology itself more shocking than the noise. The hostess tries to compose herself. "It's all right," she whispers. "It's only a sign." The clergyman's lips move rapidly, the cadence of silent scripture. The doctor leans forward, squinting toward the tambourine, as though it might confess under scrutiny. "Air currents," he mutters, half to himself. "Possibly static." Yet he doesn't reach down to retrieve it. You suspect even skepticism has its limits. When the room smells this strongly of wax and fear, the medium's body shifts slightly, her shoulders twitching as if under unseen hands. "There is sorrow here," she says softly, "a sorrow that lingers still." Her voice deepens on the last word, almost masculine in timbre, and the effect is enough to send another tremor through the circle. Someone inhales sharply, another whispers, "Merciful heavens." The candles nearest the medium flicker violently, their flames stretching thin and white, then snapping back into their usual calm. For a moment, you're not sure what's more unsettling, the phenomena themselves, or the way everyone seems eager to assign them meaning. Every breath, every flicker of light becomes evidence. The doctor shifts his gaze toward the medium's hands, watching for sleight of movement. The clergyman watches her face, searching for sin. The widow simply watches, her expression rapt and unbearably hopeful. You realise that beneath the tension, beneath the polite fear and whispered awe, there is something far heavier. Genuine grief, each of them in their own quiet desperation, has brought something into this room that cannot be measured. Loss, guilt, longing. And now all of it seems to have taken shape in the dark. The table shivers suddenly, a soft but unmistakable tremor that makes the glassware clink faintly. The doctor straightens, ready to claim coincidence, but the sound repeats, stronger this time. It feels less like movement and more like breath, as if the wood itself has exhaled. The aristocrat pulls his hand back instinctively, before remembering decorum and returning it, the motion so smooth it could be mistaken for composure. The hostess whispers "steady" again, her tone no longer confident but pleading. You can feel your own pulse in your fingertips now, every beat transmitted through the shared grip of the circle. The warmth of human skin, once reassuring, now feels too real, too alive. The air smells of hot wax and something faintly metallic, like rain on stone. The medium's head tilts to one side, her eyes half closed. "They gather near," she murmurs, so many voices at once. She begins to sway slightly in her chair, the motion slow and rhythmic, as if guided by a current no one else can feel. The clergyman begins to pray in a low whisper, a stream of Latin that sounds as out of place as a hymn in a theatre. The doctor mutters something about magnetism. The widow sobs quietly, her breath hitching against the hush. You notice that no one lets go of their neighbour's hand, though several seem on the verge of doing so. It's as if the entire circle has become one creature, awkward, fearful, ridiculous, but bound by the collective need to see this through. A dull thump sounds beneath the table, abrupt and close, followed by a rush of cold air that seems to sweep across everyone's ankles at once. The hostess gasps, clutching the edge of the table. The candles flicker again, though this time the flames don't bend outward. They draw inward, shrinking, as if the air itself has been stolen. The room feels smaller now, as though the walls have crept closer. The medium's breathing grows shallow, almost frantic. "Do not fear," she says again, but the command trembles. You can't help noticing the absurdity of it all. A dozen adults sitting rigid, in near darkness, terrified by furniture and candlelight, yet too well-mannered to admit it. The hostess still insists on refinement, offering soft reassurances that sound like the closing remarks of a dinner party gone wrong. The doctor rubs his temple and peers toward the ceiling, as if hoping to spot the trick mechanism that will restore his dignity. Somewhere to your left, the aristocrat quietly mutters, "Extraordinary," in the same tone one might use for a new wallpaper pattern. The humour is delicate, accidental, and gone as quickly as it arrives. The table trembles again, harder this time, and a small glass tumbles onto its side. The sound is sharp, decisive, and final enough to silence even the clergyman's prayer. The medium's back arches slightly, Her gloved hands tighten until the tendons show pale beneath the silk. "They are here," she says, each word drawn out with effort. "They have crossed." Her chest rises once, twice, as if bracing against a sudden wind. The temperature seems to drop again. You can see the faint shimmer of condensation forming along the glass. The room's breath made visible. The medium's voice changes once more, lower, slower, with a cadence that doesn't belong to her. "A beloved soul among us," she whispers, the phrase carrying just enough weight to sound both sacred and rehearsed. The widow collapses into tears. The doctor exhales audibly through his nose. The hostess clasps her hands, in triumph and terror alike. The candles burn motionless now, their flames impossibly steady. For the briefest instant, it feels as though time itself has forgotten to move. Then the medium inhales sharply, a gasp so sudden and human that it startles everyone. Her head falls forward, and the room collectively leans toward her, uncertain whether to comfort or worship. The silence that follows is thick enough to swallow thought. And in that silence, every person in the circle, including you, waits for the voice of the dead to speak again. The medium does not move for several seconds after her gasp, her head bowed low, as if waiting for permission to rise. The stillness feels unbearable, stretched so thin that even the soft ticking of the clock in the hall sounds intrusive. Then with a slow, deliberate breath, she lifts her face. Her eyes are unfocused and glistening, her lips parted as though she is listening to something just beyond the range of hearing. "They are here," she murmurs, her voice unsteady but lower than before, "and they are willing to speak." The room exhales collectively, a single tremor of awe and disbelief. It is unclear whether anyone believes her entirely, but it no longer matters. The desire to believe is doing most of the work. The hostess is the first to find her voice. She leans forward slightly, her gloved hands pressed together like someone at prayer. "Is it my son?" she whispers, the words slipping out before she can gather them. The question hangs in the air, raw and fragile, too personal to belong in a parlour. The medium's head tilts slowly, her expression unreadable. "A mother's love calls very strongly," she says, eyes still half closed. "He comes when you call." The hostess lets out a shuddering breath, half sob, half relief, and her shoulders loosen as though she's just been given permission to exist again. The doctor, who had spent most of the evening maintaining the rigid posture of professional disbelief, adjusts his spectacles and frowns, yet even he cannot fully dismiss what he sees. His hand, once resting on the tabletop for balance, now trembles slightly. You can almost sense the internal debate, the calculation between compassion and logic, between letting a grieving woman keep her illusion or insisting on the dignity of proof. In the end, he stays silent. The medium's voice grows softer, carrying a kind of hushed authority that seems to draw the others closer. "You may speak to them," she says, "but speak gently." The dead are easily startled. This instruction would sound absurd in daylight, but under the sway of candlelight and suggestion, it feels reasonable, almost sacred. The circle tightens unconsciously. Heads bow, hands grip more firmly. The faint odour of extinguished wax mingles with the sweetness of lilies and human sweat. The widow beside you is the next to speak. Her voice is trembling, but her words are deliberate. "Henry," she says, "if you can hear me, forgive me for not being there when you passed." She pauses, waiting for the universe to decide whether to answer. For a heartbeat, there is nothing. Then a faint tap echoes through the wood, once, then twice. The sound is too soft to be decisive, but it doesn't need to be. The widow begins to cry quietly, with a kind of relief that feels almost shameful to witness. Across the table, the hostess reaches for a handkerchief, but does not offer it. She understands that grief prefers to keep its rituals private. The medium's breathing grows more pronounced. "He forgives," she says, each word drawn out as though plucked from the air. "He rests in light." The widow nods through her tears, her shoulders shaking. Even the clergyman, who has so far refused to participate beyond the silent repetition of scripture, lowers his eyes. His expression is one of deep unease, not with the blasphemy, perhaps, but with the fact that part of him wishes it could be true. More voices follow, hesitant at first, then gaining courage. A pale gentleman at the far end of the table asks about an inheritance dispute, whether his late uncle had indeed meant to change his will before the fever took him. The medium tilts her head again, that same deliberate stillness masking calculation. He intended justice, she replies finally, which satisfies everyone without satisfying anyone. The man nods as though this vague blessing will somehow translate into equity. Another guest, a young woman dressed in lavender silk that suggests mourning for a cousin rather than a husband, leans forward eagerly. "Can the spirit tell me," she asks, "if George knew how deeply I loved him before he went away?" The medium's response comes immediately, almost too quickly. "He knew," she says, her voice softening into a tremor that sounds very much like sympathy. "He knows still." The girl covers her face with her hands, and the doctor looks away, unwilling to witness a grief that cannot be examined under a lens. The atmosphere in the room shifts gradually, from fear to tenderness. The flickering candles seem warmer now, less ominous, as though even the light has begun to indulge the illusion. You can feel skepticism collapsing in real time, crumbling under the simple weight of wanting something to be kind. The aristocrat, who began the evening with polished irony, leans forward now with genuine curiosity. "If the dead see us," he asks, "do they judge us for the living we make of their absence?" It's a surprisingly sincere question, though the tone remains casual. The medium pauses, then smiles faintly. "They see with mercy," she replies, "for they remember how difficult it is to be alive." It's a good line, rehearsed, poetic, and perfectly tuned to the moral sensibilities of the room. Even you feel its sting. The clergyman is the last to speak, his earlier restraint giving way to something that sounds more like surrender than faith. "If the soul endures," he says, his voice cracking, "what becomes of doubt?" The medium's eyes flutter open fully for the first time since the seance began. She looks at him with startling gentleness. "Doubt is only faith that has lost its balance," she says. It is a platitude, of course, but no one seems to notice. The silence that follows feels heavy, almost reverent. You realise, watching them, that something quiet and irreversible has taken place. The line between skepticism and belief has blurred, softened by candlelight and longing. It is not that the guests are convinced exactly, but that disbelief has begun to feel impolite. To doubt now would be to wound the fragile peace the medium has spun around them, a piece stitched from grief, suggestion, and careful phrasing. For a few minutes the air seems gentler. The widow breathes evenly again. The hostess sits taller, as though her loss has been briefly dignified by ceremony. Even the doctor relaxes, folding his hands in something close to contemplation. You can sense beneath all of it the weary sweetness of collective yearning, that desperate human need to make absence bearable by giving it a voice. The medium takes another slow breath, her eyelids fluttering. "Are there any final questions?" she asks, her tone still distant, but softer now, almost tired. The room hesitates. No one wishes to disturb the illusion by continuing it too long. Finally, the hostess whispers, "Will he come again?" The question is a plea disguised as inquiry. The medium smiles faintly, eyes still closed. "He never left," she says. "He walks beside you in every sorrow and every hour of peace." The words are so vague they could apply to anyone, yet the hostess seems transformed by them. She nods once and a tear escapes the corner of her eye, vanishing into her veil. The medium lowers her hands to the table once more, her posture softening. her breathing shallow but rhythmic. They withdraw, she whispers. Their light fades. We give thanks for what has been revealed. The guests bow their heads instinctively, though no one seems sure whether this is prayer or etiquette. The last of the tapping has stopped. The air feels still again, drained of its invisible pulse. For a brief moment there is peace, a silence so complete it feels earned. Then almost imperceptibly, the candle flames swell. They flare higher, brighter, illuminating the room in sudden clarity. The faces around the table look transformed, eyes red, cheeks wet, rouge smudged into uneven stains. The hostess's hands tremble as she reaches for her handkerchief, while the widow sits motionless, her tear-streaked face glowing faintly in the wax light. The doctor blinks several times as if reacclimating to the laws of reason. The aristocrat exhales, his expression caught somewhere between awe and embarrassment. The brightness of the candles lingers a little too long, as though reluctant to fade. The guests blink against it, their pupils contracting after so much time in darkness. You can see them returning, slowly, awkwardly, to themselves. The doctor straightens his posture and clears his throat with unnecessary precision. The clergyman fumbles for composure, muttering something about grace. The hostess still looks dazed, her expression suspended somewhere between reverence and exhaustion. For a brief moment, no one speaks. It feels sacrilegious to do so, as though words might disturb whatever fragile peace has been conjured. Then the doctor rises. His chair scrapes sharply against the floorboards, the first truly ordinary sound of the evening. "Madam," he says, addressing the hostess, "if I may." His tone is calm, almost gentle, but carries the crisp edge of someone about to apply disinfectant to a wound. Every head turns. The medium, still pale from her performance, blinks up at him, her expression blank but wary. "I have seen this method before," the doctor begins, his voice carefully measured. "It is remarkably effective, but it is not supernatural." He steps closer to the table, resting one hand on the polished surface. "Observe," he continues, leaning toward the candles, "the flame flutters whenever our medium moves her hands. A delicate thread, nearly invisible in this light, runs from the candlestick to her sleeve. When she leans, the wire draws taut. The motion extinguishes one flame, disturbs another. Simple, mechanical, ingenious, but entirely human. A stunned silence follows. The hostess opens her mouth but finds no sound. The widow lets out a soft gasp, clutching her locket as though it might shield her from the explanation. The aristocrat, ever the connoisseur of scandal, sits forward with sudden interest, his eyes brightening, in the way of men who enjoy spectacle, so long as it isn't about them. The clergyman closes his eyes altogether, muttering what may or may not be a prayer. The doctor continues, encouraged by the weight of his own reason. The phosphorescent glow upon the table, too, that faint shimmer you mistook for presence. It is phosphorus powder. A touch of it upon a damp cloth, held discreetly beneath the wood, and the illusion is complete. He moves to the far corner of the room and lifts the edge of a curtain, revealing a narrow vent cut cleverly into the wall. And here, the final mystery, an opening to the servants' corridor. No doubt a hidden accomplice provided the knocking. Perfectly arranged. He lets the curtain fall back into place, dust motes swirling in the light. The hostess stares at him, her face drained of colour. "Sir," she whispers, "I will not have my home compared to a theatre." Her voice trembles not with anger, but with the brittle dignity of someone who has been robbed of her chosen grief. The widow shakes her head violently, tears streaking her cheeks. "No," she insists. "No, I heard him. He answered me. He forgave me." The medium remains motionless in her chair, her breathing shallow. For once, she does not seem to know where the performance ends. The doctor sighs softly, as if weary of being right. "Madam," he says, turning to the widow, "you heard what you needed to hear. The comfort was yours." But the voice was not his attempt at kindness lands, with the grace of a hammer. Around the table you can feel the collective recoil, that strange mixture of shame and fury that attends any revelation made too bluntly. The aristocrat smirks faintly, his tone laced with condescension. "So," he says, "our ghosts were merely clever handiwork. How very disappointing. And here I thought London had finally produced a miracle, worth attending." His words earn a few nervous laughs, but no one joins him in genuine amusement. The humour falls flat, smothered beneath the tension. The clergyman's voice rises suddenly, sharp and hoarse. "Sir, you overstep," he exclaims, fixing the doctor with a glare. "You see deception because you look for none other. What of faith? What of the soul that longs to speak?" His outburst shocks even him. His hands shake as he folds them again. The widow nods through her tears, seizing on his words. "Yes," she whispers, "you mock what you cannot feel." The dead were here. They were. The doctor's expression softens, but he does not retreat. "Madam," he replies gently, "you mistake need for evidence." That is all. It is the worst possible thing he could have said. The widow lets out a sound that is neither sob nor scream, a wounded exhalation of disbelief. The hostess rises abruptly, her composure unravelling. "Enough," she says, her voice low but shaking. "Please, enough." The medium stirs, then finally breaking her silence. Her eyes, wide and unfocused, dart toward the doctor. "You have offended the spirits," she says, her tone quivering between outrage and despair. "They will not be mocked." She presses one hand dramatically to her temple, the gesture practiced but still convincing. "The veil weakens. I cannot hold them back." The room freezes, uncertain whether to believe or retreat. The widow gasps and kneels beside her, clutching her hand. The doctor remains standing, arms crossed. "Madam, please," he says quietly, "you may dispense with the act." The demonstration is concluded. The words strike the air like a slap. The medium's expression shifts, not to anger, but to injury. Her body goes rigid, and then she collapses sideways in what could be either faint or finale. The widow shrieks. The hostess calls out for assistance, her composure finally shattering. The servant, pale but efficient, rushes forward with smelling salts and a handkerchief. For several long minutes, the room dissolves into chaos. Guests murmur in confusion. The clergyman begins to pace, torn between administering comfort and sermonizing. The aristocrat murmurs something about drama of the highest order, before being shushed by the hostess. The doctor, now looking vaguely embarrassed by the commotion he's unleashed, steps back toward the fire and mutters that the air has grown stifling. No one disagrees. The servant helps the medium to her feet. Her eyelids flutter, her lips part. "They are gone," she whispers weakly, driven away by doubt. It is both accusation and self-defense, and it works, at least on the hostess, who looks at the doctor as though he has murdered something delicate. "You had no right," she says coldly, "no right to tear the comfort from this room." The doctor opens his mouth to reply, but finds no words that sound anything like victory. For a long moment, no one speaks. The room seems hollow now, the air stripped of whatever illusion once filled it. The candles burn too brightly. Their light feels cruel. The guests avoid each other's eyes, unwilling to decide whether to feel ashamed of their belief or their doubt. The widow kneels beside the medium's chair, murmuring soft reassurances to a woman who is either unconscious or pretending convincingly to be. The clergyman bows his head, whispering a prayer that sounds suspiciously like an apology. Finally, the hostess straightens, smoothing her skirt with slow precision. "We shall end," she says quietly, "with dignity." Her tone allows no disagreement. The silence that follows the hostess's final words feels unnatural, stretched too thin across the room. Everyone remained seated for a few seconds longer than they should, as though waiting for the curtain to rise again and restore meaning to the evening. But nothing happens. No tapping, no whispering, no light dimming theatrically from the heavens. Only the dull hiss of cooling candle wicks and the faint, uneasy shuffle of people trying to remember how to inhabit their own bodies. The spell has broken, and with it, something else, not just belief, but the polite illusion that belief was ever optional. The widow is the first to move. She dabs at her eyes with a handkerchief, already damp beyond redemption, then glances about the room as though waking from a vivid dream she cannot quite recall. It was real, she says, to no one in particular, her voice trembling somewhere between assertion and plea. I know it was. No one contradicts her, but no one agrees either. The words hang there, fragile as candle smoke, before dissolving into the kind of silence that polite company uses in place of argument. The clergyman, his earlier indignation, replaced by a kind of weary shame, clears his throat. Perhaps, he says softly, we ask too much of heaven in too little time. It sounds almost rehearsed, a ready-made explanation that harms no one and satisfies less. The aristocrat seizes upon it with visible relief, nodding sagely, as though quoting scripture. Quite so. A pity, really. The conditions were not ideal. His tone implies that the weather, rather than human folly, has disrupted the conversation with the beyond. The hostess gives him a grateful glance for restoring at least the appearance of normalcy. The doctor remains by the mantelpiece, spectacles glinting faintly in the dim light. He looks neither triumphant nor ashamed, only exhausted. He swirls the untouched port in his glass, then sets it down again, realizing it has long gone cold. A simple demonstration, he murmurs half to himself, but effective. The mind supplies what it craves most. No one responds. They all hear the word mind as an insult, though he likely meant it as observation. The clergyman pointedly looks away. The medium, revived but diminished, sits upright in her chair, hands folded tightly in her lap. Her face, stripped of its practiced serenity, reveals the faintest tremor of panic. You can tell she's calculating what remains salvageable. A good medium never loses entirely. The faithful will blame interference, and even skeptics rarely press beyond politeness. Still, the humiliation lingers. She looks down, avoiding the hostess's eyes, her pale lips twitching as though she might still call the spirits back if she could only find the right apology. Conversation begins again, haltingly at first, then with increasing desperation. Someone asks whether it might rain tomorrow. Another mentions a lecture on phrenology that was apparently quite illuminating. The aristocrat, ever eager to reclaim authority, begins describing an evening at the opera, emphasizing that the soprano had fainted at the final aria. Quite authentic, unlike some theatrics I could name. The doctor coughs into his hand, and the hostess pretends not to notice. It's astonishing how quickly society can reassert itself, even over the ashes of collective embarrassment. You watch them carefully, the subtle contortions of civility reattaching to each face, like masks being reapplied after a costume ball. The clergyman offers a platitude about the need for humility in the face of mystery. The widow murmurs agreement through her tears. The aristocrat asks whether anyone has heard about a new club opening in Mayfair, which provokes a few murmured comments on decor and exclusivity. The hostess nods along, smiling mechanically, as though these fragments of small talk might plaster over the crack that now runs invisibly through her home. It's almost funny, in a bleak way, this rush to replace one kind of illusion with another. The faith in spirits collapses, and instantly, faith in etiquette rises to fill the void. Everyone clings to the familiar rhythm of conversation, even when the words themselves mean nothing. No one truly cares about the weather or the opera or the state of the roads. They are merely trying to summon something more dependable than ghosts: composure. You sip your own drink. It's warm now, metallic and far too sweet. The taste seems fitting. Around you, porcelain clinks as tea is poured and left untouched, the sound brittle against the heavy quiet. The widow refuses hers. She's staring into the half-empty teacup in front of her, as though waiting for it to ripple again. Her shoulders tremble occasionally, whether from cold or grief you can't tell. The clergyman hovers near her chair, uncertain whether to offer comfort or retreat. The doctor, mercifully, has decided against another lecture. The hostess attempts a toast of sorts. "To those who cannot be with us," she says softly, raising her glass. The others follow suit, though half-heartedly, and the clinking of crystal sounds faint and hollow. She takes a sip, then sets her glass down with unnecessary care. We thank them for their patience. It's unclear whether she means the dead or the living. The conversation fragments again. A few guests rise from their seats, pretending to stretch or examine the portraits along the wall. The aristocrat offers a comment on the wallpaper's excellent restraint of tone, which prompts murmurs of polite agreement. The hostess laughs, a dry, brittle sound, and thanks him. It's all performance again, but the energy is wrong now, the timing off. The rhythm of social life has been interrupted by something that refuses to fit neatly into conversation. You sense the exhaustion setting in, not physical, but emotional, the kind that follows disappointment dressed as revelation. The doctor lights a cigarette near the open window, the smoke curling upward into the last remnants of candle haze. The clergyman joins him, perhaps in shared discomfort, and the two exchange murmured banalities about air circulation and the dangers of phosphorus fumes. The widow rises unsteadily and walks toward the door, the servant stepping quickly to assist her. "Thank you," she says faintly. "He was here, I know he was." The servant nods, not out of belief but out of good training. You can feel the room loosening now, as though the tension has been replaced by a hollow fatigue. The laughter that breaks out next, light, polite, utterly misplaced, sounds like something dredged up from habit rather than humour. The aristocrat has begun recounting a story about a dinner guest who once claimed to have seen a ghost at his club, only to realise it was his own reflection in a window pane. The others chuckle dutifully, even the clergyman, who ought to know better. The hostess smiles along, her eyes fixed on a candle stub, as if measuring how much longer the evening must endure. You realise, as you watch them, that grief has its own strange arithmetic. It multiplies in silence, divides under scrutiny, and vanishes when shared too widely. What began as a communion of souls has curdled into embarrassment, a room full of people desperate to feel ordinary again. The faith that animated them only moments ago has collapsed, leaving behind something noisier, the clatter of teacups, the rustle of coats, the nervous laughter of people who no longer trust what they saw or what they wanted to see. There's something tender in it too, in this collective refusal to name the loss directly. The seance had given their grief a vocabulary, however fraudulent. Now, with the illusion gone, they have nothing left to say. The emptiness it leaves behind feels louder than the knocks on the table ever did. You can feel it pressing against the walls, filling the air between polite sentences. Everyone senses it, and no one knows how to bear it. The hostess stands near the mantel, her face pale and carefully still, thanking each person as though nothing strange has occurred. Her voice, though faint, retains its composure. "I thank you all," she says softly, "for your openness of spirit. This house is grateful for your company." The phrase lands neatly, as though rehearsed, a final dignified line before the curtain falls. The widow presses the hostess's hands between her own, whispering something you can't quite hear. Whatever it is, it seems to wound more than comfort. The hostess nods, her lips trembling in a smile that doesn't reach her eyes. The doctor stands nearby, attempting an apology that never forms properly. An interesting evening, he manages, his tone flat and professional. A curious demonstration. The hostess inclines her head, offering no response. Behind her, the medium has been revived and now sits slumped in an armchair, pale as milk and dramatically still. The servant hovers beside her, with a glass of water, which she accepts as though it were a sacrament. When she speaks, her voice is hoarse, the words faintly reproachful. "They departed unwillingly," she says, "but they forgive our doubt." The line earns a soft murmur of approval from the widow, a stifled sigh from the clergyman, and an audible snort from the aristocrat. The hostess announces that Miss Howard must rest. Her tone allows no disagreement, though it carries the weary gratitude of someone who has outlived her own evening. The medium is helped to her feet and guided toward the hallway, her movements weak but precise, one last graceful exit for the record. The guests part to let her pass, each lowering their gaze in a gesture that feels halfway between reverence and embarrassment. You watch her disappear through the open doors, the hem of her gown brushing against the carpet, her faint silhouette dissolving into the gaslight beyond. Conversation resumes in fragmented phrases, small apologetic words that fill the space where awe used to live. "Remarkable," someone murmurs. "Quite singular," says another. These are the same words one might use for a botanical exhibition or a fireworks display. It's easier to treat the evening as novelty than to admit how deeply it unsettled everyone. The clergyman offers a blessing that no one quite hears. The doctor stares down at his gloves as though hoping to find logic stitched into their seams. The aristocrat, already half turned toward the door, remarks that it was an extraordinary diversion, which prompts a few polite nods. The widow simply stands in silence, her expression calm but hollowed out, as though something vital has drained away. The hostess gathers herself once more, performing dignity through exhaustion. "We must not linger," she says, her voice brittle. "It grows late, and the air outside will do us good." Her attempt at lightness falters, the words fall like the clink of cold china. She thanks each guest again, shaking hands, accepting murmured compliments that sound more like condolences. No one quite knows what they're thanking her for. The evening, the illusion, or the brief permission to believe in something. The servant returns your coat and gloves, offering a polite nod as he helps you into them. His face, though expressionless, betrays the faintest flicker of sympathy. He has likely seen dozens of such nights, the same rituals of faith and fatigue repeated for different audiences. You thank him quietly and move toward the hallway, where the others are already gathered. The air here feels colder, less perfumed, more honest. Behind you, the parlour hums with the subdued sounds of departure, the rustle of skirts, the soft clatter of glassware being collected, the faint scrape of a chair returning to its place. In the vestibule, the guests exchange their final pleasantries. The clergyman wishes the hostess peace. The doctor mutters something about further investigation. The aristocrat remarks that the fog seems thicker than when he arrived, as though the evening itself has multiplied it. The widow, still pale, thanks the hostess once more, pressing her hand to her heart before being led out by the servant. The hostess stands framed in the open doorway, the light from the hall casting her in soft relief. She looks composed, almost statuesque, though her eyes flicker briefly toward the extinguished parlour behind her. When she finally speaks, her voice is quiet but unwavering. "Thank you all," she says, "for keeping faith." It sounds less like gratitude than resignation. Outside, the night has deepened. The fog curls thickly through the street, glowing faintly under the gas lamps, like breath turned solid. The air smells of coal and wet stone, with a faint trace of burnt wax that seems to have followed you out of the house. The guests drift apart in small groups, their voices muffled and directionless. A carriage rattles past, its lanterns blurring into smudges of gold. The clergyman heads east, his figure quickly swallowed by the mist. The doctor lights a cigarette, the brief flare illuminating his face before it vanishes into the haze. The widow pauses at the corner, gazing back once at the house, before disappearing into the grey. You linger for a moment at the gate. Behind the drawn curtains, you can see the faint shimmer of candlelight, the hostess's silhouette moving slowly across the window. You imagine her extinguishing the last flame, folding the evening neatly away, as though grief itself could be tidied. The image is oddly comforting. You turn up your collar against the damp and begin to walk. The sound of your footsteps feels loud in the stillness, the city reduced to distant murmurs. The dull clop of a horse's hooves, the faint toll of a clock marking the hour, the hiss of gas leaking softly from a nearby lamp. As you move through the fog, the night seems to stretch, unspooling endlessly in shades of grey. You replay the evening in your mind, the table trembling, the voices, the faint knock that could have been anything. You can't quite decide which was more unnerving, the illusion itself, or the way everyone had so quickly chosen to believe it. Even now, a small part of you wonders if doubt is any more reliable than faith. The air feels colder with each step, though you're not certain whether it's the weather or the echo of the seance still clinging to you. You recall the absurd civility of it all, the way the guests thanked the hostess, commented on the wallpaper, and discussed the weather mere minutes after conversing with the dead. There is something deeply British about it, this need to apologise to eternity for the inconvenience. You imagine future generations looking back at such evenings with amusement, never realising how desperately everyone needed to fill the silence between one heartbeat and the next. The fog thickens until the world feels reduced to sound and shadow. Your shoes strike damp cobblestones. The street lamps blur into halos. You pass closed shop fronts and sleeping houses, their windows dimly aglow like tired eyes. Somewhere ahead, a dog barks once, then stops. The city, which never quite sleeps, seems to be holding its breath tonight. You feel the faintest ache beneath your ribs. Not belief exactly, but the longing for it. For all the evening's absurdities, there had been a strange tenderness in that room. People trying, however foolishly, to make absence bearable. By the time your own street appears through the fog, the sense of unreality has faded into something quieter. Not fear, but fatigue. The sight of your door feels almost foreign, as though belonging to someone else's life. You pause on the step, your hand resting on the cold iron railing. Behind you, the fog curls and shifts, swallowing the last traces of your path. You think of the house you've just left. The drawn curtains, the extinguished candles, the guests who will never speak of the evening again. Somewhere in the city, another invitation is already being written, another table being set. You turn the key, the lock clicks softly, and the door swings inward. The air inside your home feels still, untouched, entirely your own. You step through and close the door behind you, sealing out the night. For a moment, you stand in silence, listening to the faint hum of the city beyond the walls. It feels both safer and lonelier than before, a quiet too complete to trust. You hang your coat, loosen your gloves, and glance once toward the curtained window. The fog presses faintly against the glass, as though the night is peering in. Sleep does not come easily that night. The room is quiet, the bedclothes heavy with the faint chill that follows an evening spent among too many candles and too much silence. The house has its usual nighttime sounds, the settling timbers, the sigh of wind through the window frame. But after what you've witnessed, even those small creaks carry a weight they did not have before. You lie still for a long while, watching the faint shimmer of gaslight through the curtains, and think of the people who shared that table with you only hours ago. Somewhere across the city, each of them is likely doing the same, replaying the moment belief began to flicker, and wondering, in private, whether it had ever truly gone out. The evening has already begun to arrange itself in your memory, like a painting. The ring of pale faces, the trembling candles, the medium's careful collapse. The details seem clearer now than they did in the moment, though perhaps that's what memory always does. It tidies the chaos of feeling into something almost elegant. You can still hear the hostess's voice thanking everyone for their openness of spirit, a phrase that sounded noble then and absurd now, as though curiosity were a virtue in itself. The words linger because they capture something about the age you live in, this strange century that worships both reason and spectacle, that builds railways by day and consults ghosts by night. You find yourself thinking not of the seance itself, but of the people who needed it. London is a city perpetually in mourning, draped in soot and etiquette. Death, once a private misfortune, has become a profession. There are tailors for grief, photographers for remembrance, and whole industries dedicated to transforming absence into something you can frame. The Victorians have made an art of loss, as though repetition could turn tragedy into ritual and ritual into meaning. Yet even amid this elaborate machinery of mourning, something still aches. Science has begun to explain the workings of the world, but not the whole left when someone vanishes from it. Perhaps that is why seances flourished, not because the dead refused to rest, but because the living refused to. The industrial age has made everything measurable, everything knowable, but grief resists measurement. The more people invent, the less they seem able to tolerate uncertainty. When telegraphs can send words across oceans in seconds, why shouldn't prayer find a quicker route to heaven? The seance is simply progress applied to despair. It promises a new technology for eternity. You smile faintly at the thought. The medium, with her trembling voice and phosphorescent tricks, was less an oracle than an engineer of hope. She built her illusions with the same precision as the men who lay railway lines, both seeking to bridge impossible distances. It was not belief in ghosts that drew people to her table, but belief in communication itself. The age had already grown addicted to messages, to the comfort of being answered. Even the dead, it seemed, were expected to respond promptly. The irony of it all is that the seance was never truly about the dead. It was a mirror turned inward, reflecting the faces of those who could not bear to forget. Every knock, every flicker of light, was a manifestation of loneliness made audible. The spirits, if they existed at all, were only the echoes of the living calling back to themselves. You think of the widow clutching her locket, of the hostess holding her composure like a rosary, of the doctor who could expose a trick but not the yearning behind it. They were all haunted, each in their own respectable way. You recall the moment when the table shivered under your hands, how everyone's breath caught at once, how disbelief gave way to something more complicated. It wasn't belief that filled the room, you realise now, but longing. There's a difference. Belief demands conviction. Longing requires only the absence of it. The seance gave shape to that absence, turned it into sound and ritual, made it communal. The dead may not have spoken, but for a while the living did, honestly, without irony, stripped of their polite distance. For a society that spends its days hiding behind manners, that alone was miraculous. You sit up, unable to shake the lingering sense of company. The walls seem to hum faintly with thought, the way they do after guests have left, and the air still remembers their voices. You light a candle, more from instinct than need, and its flame wavers gently in the stillness. The shadows stretch long across the floorboards, merging and parting like the silhouettes of those who once gathered around a table. You wonder how many others, in how many other houses, are doing the same. lighting small flames against the vast, dark, mistaking reflection for visitation. In a way, the seance succeeded more perfectly than anyone there could admit. The doctor left with his certainty intact, the hostess with her grief soothed by performance, the widow with forgiveness she could hold in her hands. Even the medium, despite humiliation, would find work again. The dead remained silent, but the living left satisfied. The trick was not in the wires or the phosphorescent paint. It was in the willingness to confuse comfort with truth. That willingness is endless. You think again of that absurd yet fitting symbol of the age, the telegraph, thin wires stretched across oceans, transmitting thought faster than the heart could bear. The Victorians had finally conquered distance, but in doing so discovered loneliness on a scale never known before. The seance, in its way, was a natural extension, an attempt to cross the last uncharted frontier. They built telegraphs to speak across continents, and when that no longer amazed them, they tried to build one to speak across eternity. The candle sputters and its small flame steadies again. The room feels close now, full of quiet shapes your reason insists are furniture. Yet the air seems to hold something else, not presence but residue, as though the thoughts of the evening have followed you home. You glance at the mirror across the room, half expecting to see another reflection beside your own. There is none, of course, only you, and the faint tremor of light. Still, the feeling remains, the faint suspicion that memory is the truest haunting of all. You draw the blanket higher around your shoulders, thinking of the people you've lost and the ones you will. It's almost comforting to imagine them nearby, even if only as inventions of the mind. Perhaps that's what the seance offered most honestly, a structure for yearning, a dignified way to speak to silence. You can almost forgive its theatrics. After all, grief has always been a kind of stagecraft. It demands an audience, even when that audience is the dead. The candle burns lower, its flame shrinking into a pool of light that makes the shadows seem bolder. You blow it out with a slow, measured breath. The darkness folds neatly back into place, thick and patient. The house returns to its natural quiet, but it does not feel empty. The air is still and watchful, as though filled with invisible company. You lie back and close your eyes, hearing once more the faint echo of a voice that never truly spoke. The room is silent, but feels crowded all the same. And that brings us to the end of tonight's story. The tale of a quiet London evening when the living tried to summon the dead, and instead discovered themselves. Beneath the lace and candlelight, it was never the spirits who answered, but grief dressed in good manners. Feel free to like, subscribe, or leave a comment with another forgotten corner of history you'd like explored next. If you'd like early access to more of these quiet descents into forgotten history, ad-free audio of the episodes, or just want to support the show, there's a link to the Patreon in the description. If you're listening on a podcast app, a rating or review helps more people find their way to these stories. And special thanks to the supporters who make this show possible, including our chroniclers, Andrew S. and Rich Davis. Sleep well.